treat each other. It's hard to conceive. Oh, Earth is ghetto. I wanna leave. Oh, Earth is ghetto. I wanna leave. I wanna leave. They got their hungry, starving, nothing to eat, and the homeless living out on the street, and the sick are dying. Cricket police, politicians lying, criminals on the street. I got 5-volt fuel if you need it from me. I'll sit in the back if we're riding too deep. Better lock the doors, these people are stealing cheap. Roll the windows off so we can ride off in peace. Oh, Earth is ghetto. I wanna leave. Oh, Earth is ghetto. I wanna leave. I wanna leave. Oh, I've been down here stranded indefinitely. I can't reach my planet, but I need to leave. You should see these people. It's hard to believe how they treat each other. It's hard to conceive. Oh, Earth is ghetto. I wanna leave. Oh, Earth is ghetto. Oh, Earth is ghetto. I wanna leave. Earth is ghetto. Oh, Earth is ghetto. Oh, Earth is ghetto.
evil is coming that threatens our kingdom, our freedom. But we have a weapon they are not prepared for.
My king, the Europeans wish to conquer us. They will not stop until the whole of Africa is theirs. We must fight back for our people.
Aneska, you're asking me to take them to war. War.
Some things are worth fighting for.
Don't know.
You are called to join the king's guard. No kingdom in all of Africa shares this privilege. Train hard, fight harder. We fear no one. And we fear no pain. I offer you a choice. Fight or we die.
Ready for war. Where you
To be a warrior, you must kill your tears.
We are the spear of victory. We are the blade of freedom. We are the hornet. Don't know, take my power, my power, my power. Don't know, take my power, my power.
What's up? So were we having some audio issues earlier, or are we all good now? Oh, we can clip that out. This is probably going to go on unlisted anyway. So how's the audio now? Trying to multitask. All right, we're rocking and rolling. So after watching that trailer, what impression did you get? Did it give you any impression that this elite group of women soldiers were actually some of the worst enslavers on the continent? Did you get any impression? Because that's what happened. But based off of this, you wouldn't get that impression. These are some type of, I don't know, warriors who are fighting against, the colonial powers, which is a bunch of bullshit. But it's interesting. Viola Davis is in this movie, and what happens a lot, because this happened with the Harriet Tubman movie. We started doing this game of FBA, ADOS, whatever, versus the tethers. And I'm not saying that the tether situation isn't real, but it's very easy to point fingers and say, well, look, Cynthia Erivo, she's a Nigerian from the UK. She's being Harriet Tubman. No surprise that the movie is ahistorical and just bullshit, right? No surprise. But Viola Davis, she one of ours. And honestly, Viola Davis is a great actress. I still prefer Angela Bassett personally, but Viola Davis is a great actress. But she's been doing some weird shit. She's been moving kind of funny. But I want to show you something else, because before we get into the mode where we're pointing fingers and saying, "Hey, the people from across the pond, the people from Africa, they are always involved in these kind of projects where they remix history and just either undermine the history of slavery or straight up lie." I want to show you something else, because this next actress was also attached to the movie, but then she changed her mind. So hold on one second. All right, I'm going to try to share my screen on Twitter. I haven't done that before, so we're going to see what happens.
Martine's great-grandmother Yaga was enslaved, but remained on African soil. On the beach at Ouida is a memorial. It bears witness to the fate of thousands of prisoners that the warrior women captured by order of the kings to be sold to Europeans into the transatlantic slave trade. And it bears witness to the over 2 million women and men who from the 17th to the 19th centuries were loaded onto slave ships here, on what came to be called the slave coast of Africa.
It was very emotional, very overwhelming to consider that side of the story, you know. We've heard a lot about the valor of the Agojie, how unstoppable they were, but until now, I hadn't really heard the other side of the story, you know. It came down from this historic, almost like glorious remembrance to just the hard, brutal truth of what were some of the outcomes of their actions.
So Lupita was initially attached to this film. And even though this film has nothing to do with Black Panther, it would have been almost like there was a little bit of connective tissue from the two projects, especially since the new Black Panther, if I'm not mistaken, comes out in November. So I could see why they would want her attached to this movie. Also, Lupita Nyong'o was a part of 12 Years a Slave, which she was excellent in. I don't know if you guys have watched 12 Years a Slave, but it's a really great film. Lupita Nyong'o is a very talented. She has that classic training. And I know people get very specific about, you know, they came from this part of Africa, or they are the descendants of the slave traders, or maybe they're not even related to the slave trade whatsoever. I get it. I get people can be very specific about that. People are connecting their identities to that. But that look in her face, the look of horror once she realized what was going on and what that place meant and what that project was, like the person who has that feeling in their face when they encounter that truth, those are my people. Whoever that person is, whatever color that person is, if they have that same feeling, those are my people. So that's how I conceptualize those type of things. Lupita, I really like Lupita. She's done some really good projects. People try to come for Lupita, but I mean, I really like her. She's one of my personal favorites. Yeah, 12 Years a Slave is a good film. It's a rough one. It's a really rough film to get through. It's one of those films, it's like Precious. Like you see it and you don't want to see it ever again because it's like it already drained all the energy out of you just watching it, going through the whole experience, and you just don't want to do it again. Though you respect the actors and what they brought to the project, it's just Emotionally, it's too taxing. So, and that's one of the important things. It's like, we get it. We can't control history. But when you don't acknowledge it, or worse, you play the game of gaslighting because you think it's funny, then we have an issue. See, that's why I'm not a big fan of these people who pretend to be Americans, or they pretend to be biracial just to cause issues online because they're just bored individuals, or maybe they're hoping they can get some AdSense dollars thrown in their direction. It's really disgusting. And it's one of the biggest issues that I have, is that our culture is the only ones that experience this, because I don't feel like this happens a lot with white people. Like, you don't have white people from the UK pretending to be Americans to cause issues with white Americans. They don't do that. People don't care about that shit. But for some reason, we're having this problem online with this whole ADOS versus, non-American blacks. It's a very interesting phenomenon. But I also have a suspicion that a lot of those people who claim to be some Nigerian living in the UK who's talking all this shit about Black Americans, those are probably white trolls. And what I plan to do with the Mudbone documentary, the Jennifer Chapton story, is show you just how insidious a lot of these white trolls are, and how they like to just pretend to be Black Americans or mixed race Americans, so they can get on these panels and get in these conversations, so they can divert the conversation to the worst place possible. And then that attitude spreads. And it's not to absolve responsibility for the other people involved in the panel, because in my opinion, many of them are willful idiots. But it's an interesting fact that this is going on in our community. Some people may think it's, it's planned. Some people think, it's just random people. I think it's a little bit of both, because I do know that there's something called paid trolls. I don't know if she falls in that category of a paid troll, but something to think about. What the hell is that? I mean, that gentleman, he's definitely trying to get his channel popping again. And is it just me, or does he give you this kind of prostitute-y energy? He comes off like a whore. I don't know what it is. It's just, I don't know. Maybe because I've been living in LA long enough, I can spot a prostitute pretty well, but it just, I don't like it. I don't like it at all, to be quite honest with you. Oh, what's up, Abby, by the way? Welcome aboard. FBI found out about the Nazi groups online trolling as other people and starting, and sometimes it's organized like Nazi groups. Sometimes it's just randos. Like, you'd be surprised how much free time people have to do shit like this, like get on the internet and just harass people. Like, if I'm getting in your ass, it's because you started something with me. I'm a person, like, I'm going to get my lick back. If you do something to me, I'm going to get my lick back. And I'm not going to hit you with the same force you hit me. I'm going to hit you 100 times harder. So, like, you want to push the narrative that I'm stalking people, I'll accept that. But just know that person did something to me first. They just can't fight. It just is what it is. I don't know what to say. But there's also people who, for real, set up whole discords where they're just talking shit about people. I mean, there's people who admitted to going inside of these discords and seeing all this weird stalking stuff. So, yeah, people are weird on the internet. It's a dangerous place. Now, let's get into the meat and bones of the real issue with Woman King. And I feel this video did a very good job of just wrapping it all up. And all of these videos are going to be cited in the description once the stream is over. Check it out. Subscribe to these people. Give them support because they do really great videos. So hold on 1 second.
The Woman King, the brainchild of social justice activist, producer, and former actress Maria Bello and Dana Stevens, is in theaters. Sony, who greenlit the movie in 2020, surely thought they must have had a movie that was with the times and would resonate with audiences everywhere, making it the next Black Panther at the box office. Instead, its opening weekend is marred by the hashtag Boycott Woman King trending, and the ones driving that hashtag hail from the Black community. In this editorial, I will begin with exploring what is so bad about the Woman King, the measures the studio have gone through to protect it, and what lessons should be learned from this. Now, full disclosure, this is a part of history that, like most, I am not too familiar with. My fellow YouTuber and good friend Mr. H Reviews has done his research on the matter though. So this first came on my radar through his video on the topic, and our subsequent discussion on it, both of which you will find linked in the description. Since then, I have done some reading on the topic myself, and while I by no means can claim any kind of expertise on the topic, it is pretty clear, even from a superficial reading, that the Dahomey were villains. To the point where one can assign terms like good or evil, they were, without a doubt, and without much grey area, sheer evil. They weren't merely slavers, they were practically perpetrators of genocide. History versus Hollywood writes, and I warn that this is a graphic account. The Kingdom of Dahomey was a bloodthirsty society bent on conquest. It was customary for the Dahomey to return home with the rotting heads and genitals of those they killed in battle. They conquered neighboring African states and took their citizens as slaves, selling many in the Atlantic slave trade in exchange for items like rifles, tobacco, and alcohol. Many of the slaves they sold ended up in America. They also kept some slaves for themselves to work on royal plantations. The business of slavery is what brought Dahomey most of its wealth. For them, it very much came down to either enslave others or become enslaved yourself. The women warriors, the Agoji, fought in slave raids along with the male fighters. There are accounts of Dahomey warriors conducting slave raids on villages where they cut the heads off of the elderly and ripped the bottom jaw bones of others. During the raids, they'd burn the villages to the ground. Those whom they let live, including the children, were taken captive and sold as slaves. The movie strategically downplays this part of Dahomey's history so as not to complicate the story with the truth. Each year in Dahomey, roughly 500 slaves and criminals were mass executed in large-scale human sacrifices during the religious ceremonies of a festival known as the Annual Customs of Dahomey. Most were sacrificed by way of decapitation, a method of killing widely used by the Dahomeyan kings. The 1727 annual customs of the Dahomey ceremony reportedly saw as many as 4,000 people sacrificed. Also, when the Europeans banned slavery, the Dahomey kept at it. John Boyega's character, King Giso, is a real historic character. But Viola Davis' character, Naniska, who demands the Dahomey stop slavery, is entirely fictional, even though there are historic references to a teenager girl of that name. Only she didn't demand slaves be freed so much as she beheaded them. In other words, the movie The Woman King takes some extreme liberties. Of course, that is nothing new. Movies like 300, The Patriot, and U-571, to mention but a few out of many, have changed some events or ignored some context for the purpose of furthering a narrative. But the liberties taken by The Woman King go beyond that and well into overt falsification of history territory. It's one thing when a Marvel movie does it, or a genre flick like The Mummy, because they never claimed to be historically accurate in the first place, or based on real events. The Woman King does both. That is the key difference here. If the producers were hoping for another Black Panther, and they were, they can't be pleased with the response. The Rap wrote, "Who is driving the hashtag Boycott Woman King trend on social media in protest of the Viola Davis starring historical epic that hit theaters today? Perhaps surprisingly, it's not the same people who dropped racist memes in reaction to the first look at Halle Bailey in Disney's live-action The Little Mermaid trailer. Critics don't have an issue with Davis playing a strong black leader in The Woman King, but are alarmed that the history of the Dahomey tribe, who sold other Africans into slavery, has been whitewashed. Time to boycott the Woman King movie. The film is about the Dahomey and Benin that traded slaves into the transatlantic. This may be the most offensive film to Black Americans in 40-50 years, wrote Los Angeles attorney and producer Antonio Moore. Let's be honest, folks. It's a movie about an African tribe famous for selling slaves to Europeans that was made into a female empowerment story by two white women writers. You don't have to be very woke to see the problem here, wrote one Twitter user. The challenge for Sony here is that there really hasn't been any backlash to the movie to speak of at all, and what there is comes from the Black community and is based on actual written history. So the only real response has been, see this movie or you'll support the narrative that Black women cannot lead the box office globally. The tragedy here is that if you ignore the falsifying of history, The Woman King is by all accounts a very good movie. It tells an African story, and there should be more movies like that. There are countless African stories based on real history as well as myth and legend, spanning the width of the continent, dating back thousands upon thousands of years. And these stories should be told and presented to a wider audience. So that is not the issue. The issue here is that to lead what could and should be a charge, Sony chose to back two white social justice activists in telling a lie and a falsification of history. They didn't tell.
Wait a damn minute. Wait a minute. Wait a minute. This broad right here to the left, I want to say she was in White Chicks. Remember White Chicks? She was one of the girls that actually had beef with the White Chicks that the Wayans brothers were impersonating. If I'm not mistaken, that's her. It's just interesting that a person who was involved in a whiteface movie would be involved in this. I pay attention to little stuff like that because you'd be surprised that the same kind of actors, same kind of producers, same type of companies are involved in the same kind of offensive shit. So let's continue.
An African story. They told a story that fits their revisionist and subversive agenda. That is the issue here. Sony got played and made the wrong movie. One can only hope that they and everyone else will recognize it, and not let that deter them from telling actual African stories that should be told in the future. Let me know your thoughts on this in the comments.
Well, my comment is the shit was terrible. I mean, I'm not going to go see it. To be quite honest with you, when it comes down to those type of things, when history is just completely like spat on, then I have an issue. So there's levels to this shit, right? So he mentioned The Patriot. The Patriot had a lot of historical inaccuracies. It's a Mel Gibson movie. What do you expect? But it wasn't to the level of just absurdity, right? It wasn't like the Americans invaded England and took over England. Like, that's the absurd level that Woman King is at. So in The Patriot, one of the characters, like the main villain, I think his name was Colonel Tarvington or something like that. Bloodthirsty dude. Burning Christian churches, just a fucking monster, right? Which probably wouldn't have happened back in those days because, you know, they were Christian too, so the chances of them burning the Christian church is unlikely. They still viewed them as British subjects. So there was a lot of inaccuracies when it comes down to the Patriot. But basically, it was trying to set the tone of just British oppression, right? I get what they were trying to do with that movie. And I get that there's a lot of historical inaccuracies, but the whole story isn't completely wrong. Another good example is Lincoln. Lincoln's a really good movie, but it has some historical inaccuracies. They're not glaring, but they're there. I think the problem when people try to make comparisons with movies like this or movies like Harriet, for example, that Harriet Tubman movie, they're not equal. And the inaccuracies in those movies are tremendous to the point where it's like we're not even talking about a true historical event. You're taking pieces of what happened and changing it in a way that is just, I feel like it's a troll. Like, I feel like it's a joke in a way. And it feels like a white joke. See, one thing about white humor and black humor is very performative. When you think of our best comedians, they're performers. Martin Lawrence, performer. Red Fox, he was even a performer. There was a performing with their jokes. It's very visual. And when you think of white comedians, you think of the great ones, George Carlin, storytellers. They tell you the whole story and then they get you with the punchline. And this is what it feels like. We're going to get this racist history of these women who were basically genocidal monsters who pushed the institution of slavery. But we're going to make the movie appear like they're freedom fighters. And we're going to get the best or the most decorated at this time Black actress to be a part of this film. And then if anyone says anything about the film, we're going to either call them racist or misogynistic. And then we're going to bully people and tell them they need to see the movie, or they're one of those people, they're misogynistic or racist. It's a very useful tool. They did it with Harriet. And Harriet, I think, made a little bit more money than this movie. I think Harriet made somewhere along the line of 30 million, something like that. A colleague, he was an older black gentleman. I think he was like in his 60s or something. He saw the movie. And I told him I had no interest in seeing it. And I explained to him, like, that movie is not at all historically accurate. In the end of the movie, Harriet Tubman releases her slave master. She has him at gunpoint, but she gives one of these fucking speeches and throws the gun and allows, her white master who's been chasing her down, trying to kill her, to escape. First of all, Harriet Tubman would have shot that motherfucker in the face. Okay? Harriet Tubman would have shot him in the face. If you knew anything about Harriet Tubman, you would have known ain't no speech. She was a woman of very few words, honestly. And it just goes to show you that they don't care about the history. It's a troll. It's a joke. It's meant to be disrespectful. I feel like it's the new kind of racism. You can't be overtly racist and call people the N-word anymore. But if you're a powerful studio, you can tell historical lies and basically poison the mind of generations afterwards. Because people don't remember the truth, and they don't read the books, but they will remember the movie. So just wanted to cover that whole woman king thing. I'm going to catch up on some of your comments. Who killed who? Oh, Harriet. You know what? I actually was thinking about doing a Where Are They Now? Well, maybe not a Where Are They Now, since they're all dead at this point. But like when we look back at history, like at Harriet Tubman, Sojourner Truth, we remember their highlights, but we don't talk about what happened afterwards or the latter part of their life. And you only figure that out if you're really interested and you do some research. So, I may have a new project coming up in 2023 where we actually look into the latter years of some of those historical idols and figure out what's going on with them. And also clear up some shit because, for example, Frederick Douglass was not biracial. I'm sorry. He wasn't. And I can prove it. Hold on 1 second. 1 second. So Frederick Douglass was born in Maryland. His mother was Harriet, and there was rumor, emphasis on the word rumor, that his father was Aaron Anthony, right? That has been the story. So this is before DNA. But now people can get DNA tests. And no member of the Bailey family is related to any descendant from Aaron Anthony. None. Zero. Now, of course, many of them are related to other white people because so is the institution of slavery. I mean, most black people got some type of trace of whiteness because of that. It just comes with it, right? But none of them are related to Mr. Anthony. Not to say that Mr. Anthony didn't rape Frederick Douglass's mother. Not to say that didn't happen, but that's not his father. We have DNA. We can look and see if any of this information is true. And also, he doesn't look biracial. I mean, come on now. Like, even the ones who say we're black passing biracial. Yeah, I know. I've seen those. Look, when you've lived in New York City and LA, you've seen pretty much every kind of biracial there is. Because people move to those cities to become actors, to become models. So every fucking version of mixed I've pretty much seen. That's a black man. Now, could he have had a white grandfather? Potentially. Like, you know, like I said, so is the institution of slavery. But according to him, a lot of his roots come strictly from Africa. I think he said that his grandmother was actually from Africa. But here's the other part. Here's the other part that people don't know about, or at least they don't think about. When Frederick Douglass was around, he was an abolitionist. And his job is to abolish slavery. And a part of that is playing political games. And political games also involves propaganda. And one of the most provocative forms of propaganda during the time was getting white people specifically, white men, to realize that there was something called the white slave issue, where a lot of these slaves were actually octoroon, quadroons, and basically almost indistinguishable from white children. And then you have someone like Frederick Douglass, who's distinguished, intelligent, a great orator, all the things that you would want in a white person, except he's in a black man who's a slave, who had to run and steal his freedom. He always would, start his speech with, I stole these hands, I stole this body, I stole it away from my master. So it was very provocative. It would affect white people who were either abolitionists themselves, or maybe they were open-minded to the idea, much like how we debate things today, or how they used to debate other topics, like, say, gay marriage, for example. That's the last big one. Or even abortion. How people debated today did the same thing about slavery. There was propaganda then, just like there's propaganda now. And part of the propaganda was, see this guy? He's a mulatto. Look how intelligent he is. And they had him enslaved. Come listen to his speech and then, donate. A lot of you guys don't also understand that a lot of these abolitionists, most of these abolitionists, I would say 90%, were rich white men. They're kind of like the liberals today, where they can sit around and pontificate about, how wrong slavery is. Honestly, many of these white abolitionists turned on Frederick Douglass. They don't tell you about this part. They don't tell you about how they were putting in newspapers that Frederick Douglass had a white lover. These abolitionists that, had his back so much. So there's so much about slavery that people don't know. There's so many things about history that people don't look into. And I'm going to start suggesting some really good books. And also audio books. I mean, I get it. It's hard to read stuff because we don't have time to sit down with a book. Some people really like it. It's therapeutic to just sit down with a book and read, or sit down with their tablet and just read. Sometimes you get to, just listen to an audio book. You're still getting the content, and it's really good content. So here's a transition. Get an option. We can talk about Blueface and get real gross and awkward, or we can talk about if the South won. You guys decide. Put a 1 in the chat if you want to talk about if the South won. Put a 2 in the chat if you want to talk about Blueface. I'm going to give you guys 30 seconds as I get some water. Not what's a Blueface. Okay, we're going to do Blueface then. Blueface, well, here's the funny thing. I was talking to another person regarding the whole Blueface situation. We talked about this last week. If the person feels comfortable with raising their hand and admitting to this conversation, feel free. So, do you know when you have a thought in the back of your head, but you're afraid to tell people because you don't want people to think you're weird or crazy? I had this thought about Blueface and his family. I've never shared it with anybody, but it's this hunch that I had this feeling, right? So the person that I'm speaking to, they go ahead and say it. They say, yeah, there's some weird incesty shit going on between him and his mom. I say, yes, I thought the same shit. It's really weird. Like, his mother is very controlling of his sexuality in a very weird kind of way. Even if she ain't fucked the son, she might as well fuck the son because the energy is off. Like, so much so that his current girlfriend had to beat up his mom and beat up his sister. And to be quite honest with you, like, this Krishan Rock chick, you know what? I don't even want to deal with her because Krishan Rock, she's very aggressive and she fights a lot of people. She goes on these television shows and she's beating up people, and it's not okay. So let me actually. So anyway, she actually was a legitimate athlete. Like, she was very talented athlete. She comes from a very broken home. She's from Baltimore. And honestly, I think they both suffer from a lot of trauma. I think Blueface's mother, even if she wasn't fucking him, she was definitely abusing him. And it's just there's a weird energy going on here. So let me give you a little bit of Miss Rock before we move on to the fuck shit that happened this weekend. Hold on one second.
Dirty. What it was. You don't clean up after yourself. I'm clean up. All right, I just cleaned your dumb ass up, bitch.
So that's Miss Rock. Now, let's also reflect on how ironic it is for a person to claim that another person doesn't clean up, and then that person beats you up in the kitchen sink. It's ironic. Sometimes God just moves in very funny ways, but that's her, right? So, like I said, she comes from a very broken family in Baltimore, and ever since she's been with Blueface, there has been this toxic relationship. She's beating him up. It's mostly her beating him up. Like, they tried to make it look like he was beating her up, but I'm mostly seeing her beat him up. Like, she's beating the shit out of this dude a lot. And they're fighting a lot over weird shit. Like, she's missing a tooth, and apparently he got upset with her, and he confiscated the tooth. Like, she got like a replacement, and he confiscated it. So they have like some really strange, bizarre dynamics. But it got worse, right? So apparently her family came, well, no, correction. Blueface met them in Baltimore. So it wasn't like they came to LA. They were in their territory. And well, things went left. Initially, it was described, oh, Blueface, he beat up, Krishan's father and, knocked him out. I'm like, okay, first of all, so like Blueface is what, 25 years old? You knocked out some 58-year-old man. I mean, congratulations, I guess. But then the video dropped. And there was more to tell because see, people be lying. So hold on 1 second. Okay, this is Blueface. You can see his tall self on the left with the blue on. And boop, popped in the face. That was dad. You can tell by all this gray hair on top of his head. Blueface is pissed off now because he got punched out by some old dude. I guess that's Poison Ivy with the orange hair. We'll see it again. And boop. I'm sorry. That's not funny. This family is falling apart. Okay, and watch out. Boop. You know it's a sad day when you get to sneak an old man from behind. I don't know. Like to me, it looks like these are two very young people who are very damaged emotionally, who come from very jacked up families, and my only problem is I don't think this is going to end well. Like this is a very grim prophecy, but this has a very Phil Hartman kind of vibe to it, where this is not going to end well, even with them together. Even if they didn't have their parents involved, I think there's too much violence in this relationship for this to end positively. So if I could give you guys any advice, if you're listening, Blueface, Krishan, I think y'all should separate. Probably seek out mental health services, get some therapy, and hopefully the next relationship you guys have, you'll at least understand your trauma a lot better. You may not be past it, but you at least understand it, and you also choose a better person to get involved with because it seems like they're very combustible. Let's check out some of these comments. Sorry, I'm ranting. So let's start in a very interesting spot. Why did the two meet to beef? You know what? You know how that shit goes. Come on now. Abby, you know people meet to beef. You know, like you may not engage in that, but we know people who do. We know people who get together to fight. Yeah, the orange hair, she was looking like Poison Ivy. Like I don't know what she was thinking. But clearly the family has a lot of chaos. So having jacked up head and bad outfits, not surprising. Oh yeah, you missed the whole fight with Blueface. Blueface got knocked out by an old dude, and hilarity ensued afterward. I'll definitely send you the video via Discord. What happened? What I missed? What happened? Algorithm police. Wait a minute. Did something happen? My stream is unavailable. Wait a minute. Wait a minute. Hold on. Hold on 1 second. I don't know. It looks like it's going on my end. Put it on. It's back on. All right. I had to double check. I had to do a double take. Maybe dad got jealous. Old dudes think they're young up until they get hit by a young boy. You know what? You know what I think? I think because Krishan said this. Krishan said that her father should have got knocked out a long time ago. She said that her father abused her mother. Said like he tied her up or some crazy shit like that. I think I think a lot of times, and this is something a lot of people don't talk about, when these parents are abusive to their children and their children turn into adults, that abuse that they did for decades, well, not decades, but at least 18 years, that abuse doesn't go away, and they don't completely take their fangs out of that kid just yet. So I honestly think dad thought he could still flex his muscles and be aggressive and kind of run that situation. There's no heroes in this entire ordeal. Everybody's bad here, but it's something to think about. Yeah, I don't know. They're already trying to get me. They're trying to get me with maybe a copyright strike. Who knows? Man, the DeBarge. You know what? Let me hold off on that. There's a lot to say about the DeBarge family. We're gonna hold off on that. We're gonna hold off on that. But there's a lot to say about that family. Let's just say this: with the divestor movement where it is today, where you have all these women talking about, well, we just need to get guys who are not black. Okay, that's fine. I'm here for interracial marriage, interracial dating. I'm a product of it. Like, if not for interracial dating, I wouldn't look the way I look, right? But if you are getting with people for a tokenized reason, those relationships are never going to work out. And the DeBarge family is a good example of a black woman who was so excited that a white man blinked in her direction, and she basically sacrificed her children for that type of behavior, like for that type of attention. Excuse me, for that kind of attention, she sacrificed all her kids. And a lot of times in these conversations, it's easy for us to point at the white mother and these like biracial families. Oh, it's the white mother. If your mother was black, you would have a better identity of self. And nah, not always. Because what if your black mother's a coon? Then what? Like, then what? I mean, you're just as you're in just as bad of a situation as a person with a white mother who happens to be racist and an absentee black father. I mean, it is what it is. And I think that's the problem with the DeBarge family. The mother was a coon. And you can actually see a lot of her behavior and kind of safely say, yeah, she meets the criteria. Definitely meets the criteria. Hmm? Ah, okay. Speaking of ugly hair colors, I'm not feeling Haley's hair in The Little Mermaid. Did they give her strawberry blonde hair? It looks rust, like a rust kind of a color. I think they were trying to, I feel like they're trying to walk a line, because if they made it like, because that's the kind of color that you see a lot of black people who are redhead. They do have that kind of rust color. It's never this crimson or this, bright red color like Ariel from the from the friggin' cartoon. And I think that's what a lot of people wanted. But I think that's because if they go down that route and they make it too red, then you're gonna have people saying, that's not real, that's not how black people hair is. It'll be one of those type of situations. So I think Disney is trying to walk a tightrope. Oh yeah. I'm looking for the DeBarge family stream. Yeah, it's gonna be a rough one. Fran, you know what, Fran? I would actually love to have you on the panel tomorrow if you're available for the Mariah Carey stream. Of course, Abby as well. And the reason being is you women are around the same age. You both kind of grew up in that time period, and a lot of this book is set in New York in the 80s and the 90s. And it's talking about just the dynamics of what it was like to have the kind of identity or the type of phenotypes that Mariah had. Because I noticed as she got away from Long Island and actually made it to the city, her view on self was a little different. And I felt like it's because she kept running into people like herself. And as you see in tomorrow's stream, when she starts meeting other young professionals, she's running into a lot of mixed people. And it's like, okay, it's I'm not the only one. It's a group of us out here. And you also see it a lot of in her relationship with Derek Jeter. And I'm going to spoiler alert, but she basically realized, you know what, Derek Jeter's family is okay. It had nothing to do with them being black and white and there being chaos. You got a black dad and a white mom who love each other. You got siblings who love each other. Maybe the issues with my family wasn't because they were interracial. Maybe those issues was because shit, our family was just fucked up. Like sometimes that's the case. So we'd love to have you. Yeah, I had to. So there was some weird school stuff, Abby. It's draining, but I have it set for tomorrow. I am not moving it anymore. It's going to be earlier in the day too, so it won't be too late for people who aren't trying to stay up too late. I'm on the West Coast, so I keep forgetting that my friends on the East Coast are like, by the time it's like what 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock almost over there. What time is it over there? It's late. Is basically my point. So I'm trying to avoid that. I'm gonna be a little more sentimental towards Mariah's siblings. She comes out with a book after her siblings expose some things. Man, her siblings been exposing stuff since forever. When I was doing my research, I found this old interview from I want to say maybe like the mid '90s, and it has Allison. And Allison basically said that Mariah's mother tried to pass her off as white, and they basically abandoned her and her brother because they were too dark. Now, y'all saw a picture of Allison. Allison looks like maybe Puerto Rican. Like you would probably think she was Puerto Rican. You wouldn't necessarily think she was a black woman. I mean, I get what she's saying, and I can understand that Allison feels that because Mariah's features are even more ambiguous than hers, that creates this weird kind of paradigm. And I've seen this in others. Like when you go to certain mixed race sectors, not even just the one on YouTube that everyone's familiar with, well, not everybody, a couple of people, but not just them. But like I've been in other spaces where you see these people going down the road of colorism and featureism because unfortunately they grew up in families where that was common on both sides. It's easy to say it's, if you grew up in a black family and you're mixed, you're going to have more support. Sometimes. It really depends on your family. The more that I learn about this, the more I understand it really depends on your family. But at the same time, Ellison does make some interesting points about passing, because when Mariah Carey first came out, it was kind of hard to determine where she fit in the world ethically, or not ethically, ethnically. They didn't know if she was Italian, if she was, Spanish girl. They didn't know what she was for a while. And that's kind of how they marketed her for a little bit. So maybe there was a little bit of passing. It's interesting that Mariah Carey's father never went to any of her premieres, no events ever. Mariah Carey's grandfather, paternal grandfather, he lived into 1994, and pretty much every picture of him has been purged off the internet. It's interesting. There's only a couple of pictures of her father online. I bring that up to make a point. Maybe there was some type of covert plan to kind of hide who she was. As you're going to learn tomorrow, Tommy Mottola was very controlling in a way that, well, you're going to see. So I wouldn't put it past him to actually do something to kind of hide who she was and hide her identity and hide her history. She even mentions it. Mariah was very, she kept it 100. Like, one thing I like about her, I like a person who keeps it real. Even if I don't like what you got to say. If you say it and you stand by it, I respect it. Even if it goes against what I believe personally. Unless it's some really weird, kind of hateful shit, then that's a different story. But even if we have different opinions. And she said straight up, Tommy Mottola was no Prince Charming. Like, there was an intercom system. Anytime she tried to get up to use the bathroom, it's, where you going? It's like, could you imagine getting out of your bed to go pee and a fucking intercom going off asking you, what are you doing? Could you imagine? But what I also plan to do in the future is I really want to do not only, I don't want to just focus on celebrities who are mixed race or light skin or whatever. That I'm going to do that, but I also want to talk about other things and kind of break certain myths, specifically this big myth about the Blue Vein Society. I mean, people keep bringing it up, and it's like, y'all niggas wouldn't even be there. I'm gonna keep it a buck. Y'all wouldn't even be there. So we're going to talk about what the Blue Vein Society was and what it wasn't and why it doesn't exist anymore. And there's a good reason why it doesn't exist anymore. So we're going to actually wrap this stream up because we've been going for an hour and there's a lot of stuff I need to finish today. Let's check out some of these comments before we call it a night. An older man and a younger woman. Yep, intercom and all. Yeah, that intercom shit was crazy. And the funny thing is, the house, the big mansion they got, she is responsible for half of the financing of that whole house. So you finance your prison. It's crazy. That her story is actually very interesting. And the entire book it's not even like she's dancing around the idea of being mixed race. She goes for it in every chapter. She always reminds you that, there's this one chapter that we're going to go through together. Let's just say, how I mentioned earlier that a lot of times Black people feel like they know what to do when it comes down to mixed race children, how to raise them, how to take care of them. Well, let's just say Mariah had an experience where she learned that wasn't the case. It's a funny story, but kind of not a funny story. Yeah, and he was 21 years older than her. Yeah. It's funny how they met. It's a funny story involving Brenda K. Starr. That's the other good thing about this book. It's like, it's a who's who of who was famous in the 80s and the 90s. And she has a story about everybody. And I like those kind of books. Amen to that. She did talk about, as she was coming up, how since she wasn't sexually active and didn't, live that kind of lifestyle, she was easily like drawn into Tommy's grip. But I also think this. Yes, Tommy Mottola was way older than her. Yes, he was inappropriate. But for her, I think she saw in him some level of stability. When you don't have stability in your life and you see someone who can bring you that stability, you kind of overlook some of the bad qualities. So think of it like this. You're 22 years old. You don't even realize how big you are. You don't realize how big you are. You're going to find out why she doesn't realize how big she is. You have these two siblings who are like way older than you, who busting shots at you through the media all day. You got people talking shit about you, even Whitney Houston talking shit about you. Everybody talking shit about you, right? And you got this older man who's like, you know what? I'm going to take care of everything. I'm going to pay for this. I'm going to, send cease and desist letters. Like Tommy did do a lot of stuff to protect Mariah or insulate. That's a better word. Insulate Mariah from a lot of negative things. And from all the trauma she experienced, it seemed like a good situation. So I can kind of understand where her head was at and why she found herself in that situation. I personally can't understand a man in his 50s being attracted. I can see you being attracted, but wanting to marry someone that young. Like, you have nothing in common. It's with Tommy Mottola, he's an interesting guy, but we'll cover more of that tomorrow. It was a hell of a price. As you guys will soon learn, it was a hell of a price. But there's a funny story because initially, before things got really petty, Tommy Mottola and Mariah were really good business partners. Like, because he understood at the end of the day, Mariah Carey could sing and she was a very good songwriter. And she understood good music. And he was really good businessman. He understood the music business. So the business side used to be real good. When she was recording her Butterfly album and she recorded My All, that song is apparently about Derek Jeter. So as he's listening to this song, he says, well, that's clearly not about me. And it's like super awkward that your husband is making reference to a song that's clearly not about him. It's about this lover who he knew about because he had people following Mariah. It was weird. Tommy Mottola's a weird dude. He's a weird dude. Also suggest some books. If there's some books that you think that will be interesting for us to break down and cover, like, I like doing stuff like that too. We may have to cover some of those books next year when I don't have as much on my plate. But let's move some ideas around. There is a reason why her sister Allison is jacked up as she is. Yes, race has to do with it, but I think it's a lot more. Yeah, I agree. I just don't know what it is. And she hasn't given a really good answer as to what it was. Because you can't put all your emotional trauma on your younger sibling who you barely knew. Like, Allison was older than her, and then by the time she was like 15, she was in a whole nother country, if I'm not mistaken. I think she had her first baby when she was like 15 or 16 or something. So it's like, you barely knew this kid. And the real issue is your sister became successful, and she made a lot of money. And you know that there's a path to Allison making some money by attacking Mariah. There's a path to it, to the bank, always. If you go into the tabloids with some drama. And this was back in the 90s where you go to the tabloids with a story, you could make a lot of money, especially on Mariah Carey, especially since there was so much talk about her race back in those days. So Celine Dion's husband was also creepy as fuck. I'm sorry. Mariah also has a story about Celine Dion. She didn't like her too much. She didn't like her too much. It was a very funny story, actually. But yeah, I did hear that. I did hear that there was some weird grooming shit going on. But you know what I'm going to definitely do? I'm going to do, like, this is a super trigger warning. I may actually wait until next year to do this one, because this one is going to be like emotionally draining also. And as a millennial, I really feel like this is definitely something I should take care of, or at least do a breakdown of. I'm going to really do a breakdown of the B2K story and really break down just how all of this happened and how Chris Stokes is somehow not in prison yet. Because if R. Kelly's in prison, why this nigga ain't in prison? So I'm going to approach that story probably next year, because when you deal with these type of stories, much like how I'm going to handle the DeBarge family, you really want to handle it with respect, because people survived this. They survived this trauma. And if you're going to talk about it and report on it, you want to, number one, be accurate, and you also want to be respectful. So with that being said, I'm going to pull the stream, put it on unlisted, excuse me. I still have a lot of stuff I need to do, and it is getting kind of late. So I appreciate you guys staying up with me, especially if you are in the Midwest, you guys are on the East Coast. If you're in any time zone where it's super early or super late, thanks for rocking with me. I appreciate you. And good night.